Hey Reddit, I never thought I'd be the guy posting one of these stories, but life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. My name's Sam. I'm 38, and I've been married to Lola, 35, for 10 years. I'm a sailor by trade, which means I spend months away from home, out on the open sea. It's not an easy life, but I've always believed that Lola and I made it work. She's an architect, brilliant, creative, and driven. Together, I thought we were the picture of stability, the kind of couple people envied. For years, I believed our marriage was perfect. Lola's career kept her busy while I was away, but every time I returned home, it felt like nothing had changed. She'd greet me with that same radiant smile, throw her arms around me, and we'd spend hours catching up like two kids in love. I'd joke about how I was her vagabond sailor, and she'd always say I was her anchor. It was cheesy, but it felt real. A week before New Year's Eve, I got called to sea unexpectedly. It was a last-minute job. A client shipment needed immediate transport, and the extra pay was too good to pass up. I hated leaving Lola behind, especially during the holidays, but she assured me she'd be fine. She had her firm's annual New Year's Eve party, which was always a glamorous event. I promised we'd have our own celebration when I returned, though it would be a little late. As the ship sailed away from the harbor, I watched the shoreline disappear, thinking about how lucky I was to have a wife like Lola. I pictured her at the party, dressed in one of her stunning gowns, her laughter echoing in the room. The thought made me smile. At least she wouldn't be spending New Year's alone. The job went smoother than expected, and by some stroke of fate, we finished early. I decided to surprise Lola and ring in the new year together. I didn't tell her I was coming home. Imagining the look on her face when I walked into the party was enough to make the long trip back worth it. I felt like the hero of some romantic movie, ready to sweep my wife off her feet. When I arrived back in town late on New Year's Eve, the streets were alive with celebration. The air was crisp, and fireworks were already lighting up the sky in bursts of color. I went straight to the party venue, a swanky downtown hotel ballroom. It was Lola's favorite event of the year, and I couldn't wait to see her smile when she spotted me in the crowd. The room was packed with elegantly dressed people sipping champagne and laughing over the hum of live music. I scanned the crowd, searching for Lola's familiar face. It didn't take long to find her. She was standing near the bar, wearing a deep emerald dress that clung to her in all the right ways. She looked stunning, and for a moment, I felt a pang of pride that she was mine. But something was off. She wasn't alone. A man stood beside her, leaning in too close, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back. I froze, my heart stuttering in my chest. Lola was laughing at something he said, her head tilting back in that familiar way. It was a laugh I thought was reserved for me. I tried to rationalize what I was seeing. Maybe it was just a colleague. Maybe I was reading too much into it. But as I stood there, watching from the shadows, the unease in my gut grew. They looked comfortable, too comfortable. The man reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. She didn't pull away. Instead, she smiled at him, her eyes soft in a way I hadn't seen in years. It was like watching a stranger. I felt rooted to the spot, my mind racing with questions I didn't want to answer. Was this a misunderstanding, or had I just stumbled onto something that would change everything? The clock ticked closer to midnight, and with each passing second, the reality of the situation became harder to ignore. Little did I know this was just the beginning. I stood at the edge of the ballroom, my mind spinning as I watched Lola with a man she seemed far too comfortable with. From the outside, they might have appeared like two colleagues enjoying a friendly chat, but the subtleties in their body language painted a different picture. She was leaning toward him, her posture relaxed, her smile unguarded. His hand lingered on her back, low enough to make me bristle, and she didn't seem to mind. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to remain calm. I didn't want to cause a scene, not yet. I needed to know what I was dealing with, to see the truth before deciding what to do. Taking a deep breath, I turned and slipped out to the balcony. The cool night air hit my face, a welcome reprieve from the stifling atmosphere inside. The balcony overlooked the ballroom, offering a clear vantage point through the tall glass windows. From there, I could observe without being noticed. My hands trembled as I pulled out my phone, positioning myself to capture what I was seeing. I wasn't sure why I did it. Maybe for proof, maybe to convince myself later that this wasn't a nightmare. I snapped a few photos, each one more damning than the last. Lola was smiling at the man, her head tilted slightly as he leaned in to say something. Her body language was soft, intimate, and unmistakably familiar. As the minutes ticked closer to midnight, the energy in the ballroom grew electric. Guests began gathering near the stage, clutching glasses of champagne, ready to toast the new year. But Lola and her companion remained where they were, detached from the crowd. The man's hand grazed her arm, trailing down to her wrist, and I saw her give a small, almost imperceptible nod. Whatever they were discussing seemed to carry an unspoken weight, and my chest tightened with every second that passed. I told myself it could still be innocent. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was being paranoid. But then, just as the countdown began, I saw something that made my stomach drop. Lola reached out and lightly touched his tie, adjusting it with a playful smile. He responded by taking her hand in his, bringing it briefly to his lips. It was a fleeting gesture, but one that sent a clear message. This wasn't just friendly. This wasn't professional. It was personal. The crowd roared inside, the countdown reverberating through the glass. I watched, frozen, as Lola turned to him, her face soft with anticipation. He leaned closer, his hand resting on her hip. Cheers erupted as the clock struck midnight. Fireworks lit up the sky, the vibrant colors reflecting off the glass. But I could only see one thing. Lola and the man, their lips meeting in a kiss that left no room for doubt. It wasn't a casual kiss. It was deliberate, slow, and full of intimacy. Her hands came up to his shoulders, her fingers curling slightly as if to hold him in place. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat heavier than the last. I couldn't look away, no matter how much I wanted to. Through sheer instinct, I raised my phone again, capturing the moment. My hands shook as I snapped photo after photo, documenting the betrayal unfolding before my eyes. I didn't know what I'd do with them yet, but I needed to have them, for clarity, for evidence for myself. When they finally pulled apart, Lola's face was flushed, her smile radiant in a way I hadn't seen in years. She looked happy, glowing with a kind of joy I thought was reserved for the life we'd built together. The man said something that made her laugh, and they clinked their champagne glasses together before she leaned in for another kiss. I turned away, my chest tightening as the realization hit me. The woman I loved, the woman I trusted implicitly, had betrayed me in the most public and humiliating way. Yet, somehow, I kept my composure. I slipped my phone back into my pocket, took a deep breath, and re-entered the ballroom as if nothing had happened. But inside, something had shattered irreparably. This wasn't the ending I had imagined for the night, or for our marriage. I lingered in the shadows of the ballroom, my thoughts spiraling as I watched Lola and her lover move seamlessly through the crowd. To anyone else, they might have looked like just another pair of partygoers, laughing, chatting, and mingling like the rest. But to me, their connection stood out like a beacon. Every subtle touch, every lingering glance, spoke volumes about what they shared. What disturbed me even more was the reaction of the people around them, or rather, the lack of one. As they moved from group to group, Lola's colleagues greeted her warmly, smiling and laughing as though everything was normal. Not one person seemed surprised or uncomfortable about the way she and this man were behaving together. A petite woman in a sleek black dress even gave Lola a knowing smirk, leaning in to whisper something that made them both laugh. The man, her lover, joined in on the joke, his arm brushing against Lola's as though it were the most natural thing in the world. I scanned the room, hoping for some sign of disapproval, some indication that what I was witnessing wasn't being condoned. But no one batted an eye. If anything, the interaction seemed casual, even supportive. It was as though this was an open secret, something everyone in the room was aware of except for me. The realization hit me like a freight train. They all knew. Her colleagues, her friends, they'd known about this affair for who knows how long, and not one of them had said a word. How many times had I shaken hands with these people at holiday parties, exchanged pleasantries at networking events, oblivious to the fact that they were laughing behind my back. My mind reeled as I thought back to those moments. The polite smiles, the vague compliments about what a great guy I was. All of it felt hollow now, part of an elaborate facade to keep me in the dark. I felt like a complete fool. I had spent years trusting Lola, believing in the life we had built together, only to find out that everyone around her had been complicit in her betrayal. My humiliation was absolute, and with every passing second, my resolve hardened. My revenge was no longer just a flicker of anger. It was a roaring inferno. I wasn't going to let this slide. Lola and her lover weren't just going to walk away from this unscathed, and neither were the people who had enabled them. They had all made a fool of me, but they were about to learn just how dangerous it was to underestimate me. I continued to watch, blending into the crowd as Lola and her lover moved to the bar. She placed her hand lightly on his arm as he ordered drinks, her touch lingering in a way that made my stomach churn. I pulled out my phone again, capturing more photos of their interactions. Every laugh, every touch, every stolen glance. It all went into my growing file of evidence. As I snapped another photo, I noticed something else that deepened my fury. Lola had been wearing the necklace I had given her on our 5th anniversary, a delicate silver chain with a small, intricate charm. She always said it was one of her most cherished pieces of jewelry, something that symbolized the bond we shared. Yet here she was, wearing it while openly flaunting her affair. It felt like the ultimate insult, a deliberate act of disrespect that twisted the knife even further. I watched as another coworker approached them, a man I vaguely recognized from a company retreat Lola had invited me to years ago. He exchanged a brief handshake with Lola's lover, then turned to her with a warm smile. "You two look good together," he said, loud enough for me to hear from my hiding spot. Lola laughed lightly, brushing off the comment, but she didn't correct him. She didn't say, "I'm married," or "this isn't what it looks like." She just smiled and moved on as if the comment hadn't mattered at all. At that moment, the depth of her betrayal became undeniable. She wasn't just cheating on me in secret. She was living a double life, one where I didn't even exist. These people didn't see her as a married woman. They saw her as part of a couple with this man, and she did nothing to correct them. My hands clenched in a fist as I fought the urge to confront her right then and there. But I knew better. This wasn't the time for an outburst. If I lashed out in anger now, I'd lose the advantage. I needed to stay calm, to keep gathering evidence, and to plan my next move carefully. This wasn't going to be just a confrontation. This was going to be a reckoning. I slipped deeper into the crowd, positioning myself to observe without being seen. The fireworks outside began to crackle, lighting up the night sky in bursts of color, but I barely noticed them. My focus was entirely on Lola and the tangled web of lies she had spun around me. She had made a fool of me, but she had no idea what was coming. My revenge was just beginning. The night was unraveling faster than I could process, but I kept my composure. My heart pounded with a fury that threatened to consume me, yet I knew I had to stay calm, to remain a silent observer. Every move Lola made with her lover was another piece of evidence, another nail in the coffin of what I thought was our perfect marriage. As the party continued, I noticed them making their way toward the exit. Her lover leaned in close, saying something that made her laugh, a soft, intimate laugh that used to belong to me. She playfully swatted his arm, her touch lingering just a moment too long. They didn't rush, but their body language was clear. They were slipping away from the crowd for a more private moment. I followed them at a distance, careful to keep out of sight. They stepped outside into the hotel's garden courtyard, which was beautifully lit with strings of fairy lights wrapped around the trees and elegant lanterns lining the pathways. The scene might have been romantic if it weren't for the knot of betrayal twisting in my gut. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. The lighting was perfect, illuminating them in a way the dim ballroom couldn't. My phone was already in my hand as I ducked behind a cluster of hedges, positioning myself for a clear shot. I steadied my shaking hands and began taking photos, documenting every damning detail. Lola stood close to him, her body angled toward his in a way that left no doubt about their connection. She reached up to adjust the lapel of his suit, her fingers brushing against his chest in a gesture that was both intimate and natural. He responded by placing a hand on her hip, pulling her closer as they continued their conversation. I snapped photo after photo, each one capturing a new level of betrayal. Lola's expression was soft, her eyes filled with a warmth I hadn't seen in years. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional. Whatever they had, it wasn't a fleeting fling. It was real, and that realization cut deeper than I expected. Then came the final blow. As the faint echoes of the party's music drifted into the courtyard, Lola's lover leaned in, his lips brushing hers in a kiss that was anything but platonic. She didn't hesitate. She leaned into him, her arms sliding up to rest on his shoulders as the kiss deepened. I captured it all. Each frame felt like a dagger, but I didn't stop. This was my proof, the undeniable evidence of her betrayal. I zoomed in, ensuring that every detail, their faces, their posture, the raw intimacy of the moment, was crystal clear. If Lola ever tried to deny this, I would have more than just my word against hers. The kiss lasted longer than I could bear to watch. When they finally pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his, laughing softly at something he said. They stayed close, their silhouettes framed by the warm glow of the lights, as if they were the stars of some romantic film. But this wasn't a film. This was my life, crumbling in front of me. I tucked my phone back into my pocket, my mind racing. I had all the evidence I needed now. There was no way to unsee what I had witnessed, no way to salvage what Lola and I once had. My trust, my love, my belief in her, it was all gone, replaced by a cold, simmering rage. I slipped away from the garden, leaving them to their moment. The faint sound of their laughter followed me as I made my way back into the hotel. I didn't care what they did next. I already knew how this would end. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. After what I just witnessed, staying at the hotel any longer was out of the question. I needed to leave, to clear my head, and most importantly, to act. The evidence I had was damning enough to shatter the facade Lola had carefully constructed, but I wasn't done yet. If she thought this was the end of it, she was dead wrong. I slipped out of the hotel unnoticed, weaving through the bustling streets of revelers celebrating the new year. The fireworks lighting up the sky above felt like a cruel joke, vibrant, joyous, and utterly disconnected from the storm brewing inside me. My steps quickened as I made my way back to our house, the place that now felt more like a crime scene than a home. When I arrived, the quiet stillness of the house was almost suffocating. Every corner of it, every piece of furniture, felt tainted now, like a relic of a life that no longer existed. The photos of us smiling on the walls, the wedding album tucked away on the shelf. All of it was a mockery of the trust I'd placed in Lola. But tonight, it was more than a reminder. It was an opportunity. I moved with purpose, heading straight to the bedroom. I grabbed a suitcase from the closet and began packing my things, tossing clothes and essentials in without much thought. There was no point in staying here. Not tonight and not ever again. But I wasn't leaving empty-handed. I needed more. Evidence. Ammunition. Something that would ensure Lola felt the weight of what she'd done. Her desk was my first target. Lola was meticulous. She loved organization, and her workspace reflected that. I rifled through drawers, flipping through notebooks, receipts, and old schedules. Most of it seemed innocent enough, but then I found a folder labeled client correspondence. It wasn't unusual for her to bring work home, but as I opened it, something caught my eye. Tucked between official documents was a handwritten note. "Last night was incredible. Can't wait to see you again. M." My stomach turned as I realized this wasn't just about her lover from the party. M had to be someone else, another name, another betrayal. I snapped a photo of the note with my phone before slipping it back into place. Every piece of evidence mattered. Next, I turned to her social media. Lola wasn't the type to overshare, but she'd always loved curating a polished image online. I logged into her laptop, her password still saved in the browser. A small mercy in the midst of all this chaos. Her Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn profiles looked harmless at first glance, but as I scrolled, I started to see the patterns. Photos of work trips that didn't add up, comments from male colleagues that seemed a little too friendly, tagged posts from friends at locations she'd never mentioned visiting. The puzzle pieces were falling into place. This wasn't just a single affair. Lola had been living a double life for far longer than I'd realized. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut, but instead of despair, it fueled my determination. She had built her web of lies, and now I was going to unravel it. I spent the next hour combing through every corner of her accounts, screenshotting anything that could serve as evidence. By the time I was done, I had an arsenal of information, enough to confront her, to expose her to her colleagues, her friends, her family, and anyone else who thought she was the picture of integrity. But I wasn't going to stop there. I needed a plan, something that would leave an indelible mark on her perfect little world. Before leaving, I grabbed a pen and a notepad from the kitchen counter. My hand trembled slightly as I scrawled the words that had been circling in my mind since the moment I saw her kiss him. I won't let this go. I placed the note on the hallway table where she couldn't miss it. It wasn't just a warning, it was a promise. She had betrayed me, humiliated me, and shattered the life we'd built together. Now it was my turn to act. I took one last look around the house before stepping out into the cold night. The fireworks had stopped, and the streets were quieter now, but inside me, the storm raged on. This wasn't over. Not even close. When I left the house that night, I didn't have a clear plan, only a burning need to act. By the time I reached a motel on the other side of town, that need had crystallized into a single, unwavering goal: to dismantle everything Lola had taken for granted. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about justice, and I intended to deliver it in full. I spent the rest of the night sketching out the first stages of my plan. Every move had to be calculated, every step precise. I wouldn't give her the chance to recover or spin the narrative in her favor. If she thought I'd slink away quietly, she didn't know me at all. The first order of business was cutting off Lola's access to our joint resources. By sunrise, I was at the bank, waiting for the doors to open. As soon as they did, I went in and withdrew half the balance from our joint accounts, the portion I was entitled to by law. I opened a new account in my name and deposited the money there, ensuring that Lola couldn't touch it. Next, I canceled the credit card we shared. It was technically in my name, and I wasn't about to let her continue using it to fund her escapades. I paid off the balance and requested a full account closure. If she tried to swipe it for a latte or a fancy dinner with her lover, she'd be in for a rude awakening. With the financial groundwork laid, I turned my attention to the legal aspect. I wasn't about to stay married to a woman who had so blatantly disrespected our vows. By mid-morning, I was sitting across from a divorce lawyer in a modest office downtown. The lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Claire, listened intently as I laid out the situation. I showed her the photos, the screenshots, and the handwritten note I'd found in Lola's files. Her expression hardened as she flipped through the evidence. "This is more than enough to proceed," she said. "We'll file for divorce immediately. Given the circumstances, you're in a strong position to protect your assets." Claire explained the steps we'd take: filing for divorce on the grounds of infidelity, ensuring that any joint assets were accounted for, and, if necessary, using the evidence to challenge any claims Lola might make for spousal support. She even suggested the possibility of contacting Lola's workplace if the affair involved a colleague, as it could violate company policy. I left her office feeling both drained and invigorated. The wheels were in motion. The photos and screenshots I'd already gathered were a solid start, but I wanted more. I spent hours scouring every corner of Lola's social media accounts, looking for anything else that might be useful. Old photos from work trips, tagged posts from her colleagues, and comments from men that now seemed far too familiar. All of it went into the growing file. I also revisited her emails. Using the login credentials saved on her laptop, I accessed her inbox and searched for anything suspicious. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. There were dozens of emails between her and her lover, some professional on the surface, but riddled with flirtatious undertones. Others were blatantly personal: plans for dinners, inside jokes, and even a hotel reservation confirmation for a weekend I'd been out at sea. I saved everything to an encrypted drive, ensuring it couldn't be tampered with. This wasn't just for the divorce, it was leverage. If Lola tried to deny or downplay her actions, I'd have proof to counter every lie. I wasn't ready to go public with what I'd found, but I knew I'd need support. I reached out to my closest friend, Marcus, someone I trusted implicitly. Over coffee, I laid it all out for him, showing him the evidence and explaining my plan. He listened without interrupting, his face a mix of anger and disbelief. "Whatever you need, man," he said when I was done. "Just say the word." His support was a lifeline. Knowing I wasn't alone in this gave me the clarity to keep moving forward. As the day wore on, my thoughts turned to the endgame. I wasn't just going to leave Lola. I was going to make sure she felt the consequences of her actions. The note I'd left in the hallway had been a warning, but the real reckoning was yet to come. I began drafting a letter that would lay everything bare, not just for Lola, but for her family, her friends, and her colleagues. I planned to detail the affair, include the evidence I'd gathered, and send it out at the right moment. Let her explain herself to the people she'd lied to. Let her deal with the fallout. I also started researching her company's policies on workplace relationships. If her lover was a colleague, there was a good chance their affair violated the rules. I wasn't above sending an anonymous tip to HR if it came to that. By the time night fell, I had my plan fully outlined. Lola would come home to find the house empty, the accounts locked, and the beginnings of a legal battle she couldn't win. She'd discover the full extent of my actions in time. But for now, I wanted her to stew in uncertainty, to wonder what was coming next. I checked into a longer-term rental across town, paid in cash to keep things discreet. My phone buzzed with messages from Lola, but I ignored them all. She didn't deserve answers, not yet. All she needed to know was that I wouldn't let this go. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Revenge, they say, is best served cold. And by the time I was ready to act, my fury had hardened into something sharp and unrelenting. Every step I'd taken, the financial lockdown, the legal preparations, the gathering of evidence, had been leading to this moment. Lola had humiliated me in the most public, deliberate way possible, and she was about to understand the depth of the consequences. The divorce proceedings were swift and efficient, thanks to the evidence I compiled and the meticulous groundwork laid by my lawyer, Claire. When Lola was served with the papers, she tried to contact me, pleading for a chance to explain. I ignored every message, letting her stew in the silence. She couldn't talk her way out of this. The evidence was irrefutable, and I had no intention of giving her the closure she craved. The court didn't look favorably on her actions. Infidelity wasn't just a moral failing. It had practical implications, especially when it involved using marital funds for clandestine trips and rendezvous. The division of assets was skewed heavily in my favor. The house, the savings, and even the car she drove, all of it was awarded to me. Lola, for all her cunning, had miscalculated just how far her betrayal would take her. But I wasn't done. With the legal battle behind me, it was time for the second phase of my plan: exposure. Lola had flaunted her affair in public, surrounded by people who knew about her double life, but said nothing. She had relied on their complicity to keep me in the dark. Now I was about to pull back the curtain. I sent an email to her closest friends, family, and a select group of her colleagues. Attached were the photos I'd taken on New Year's Eve, screenshots of her incriminating messages, and the note from her lover I'd found in her files. The subject line was simple: the truth about Lola. The message itself was short but devastating. I thought you all should know who Lola really is. For years, I believed I had a faithful, loving wife. Instead, she chose to humiliate and betray me, all while living a double life. The evidence speaks for itself. If you had any part in hiding this from me, you're as complicit as she is. I hope you can live with that. The fallout was immediate. Within hours, my phone buzzed with messages from her friends and family, some apologizing, others in shock. Her parents, who had always been kind to me, were mortified. Her mother called me in tears, begging me to reconsider. "She's learned her lesson," she said, her voice cracking. "She's lost everything." But I wasn't moved. Lola had made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. Her workplace was next. I had already done the research, and I knew her affair with a colleague violated their strict no-fraternization policy. An anonymous tip to HR, complete with the evidence I collected, was enough to trigger an internal investigation. Within a week, Lola's lover was fired, and she was asked to resign quietly to avoid further scandal. By the time the dust settled, Lola had nothing. Her friends distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with the fallout. Her professional reputation was in ruins, and without a steady income, she was forced to move back in with her parents. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she was a shadow of her former self, humiliated, isolated, and burdened by the full weight of her actions. For me, life slowly began to rebuild. I sold the house we had once shared, using the money to rent a modest apartment in a new neighborhood. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine, a fresh start free from the memories of betrayal. I focused on my work, finding solace in the rhythm of the sea and the quiet nights spent alone, piecing myself back together. Somewhere along the way, I found peace. It wasn't immediate, and it wasn't easy, but it came. The rage that had consumed me softened into clarity, and I realized that while Lola's betrayal had broken something in me, it hadn't destroyed me. I was still standing, stronger and wiser than before. I never responded to her messages or the letter she sent, pleading for forgiveness. She didn't deserve it, and I didn't need it. The silence was enough. She knew what she had lost, and that knowledge would haunt her far longer than any words ever could. As I sat on the balcony of my new apartment one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: freedom. The life I had once cherished was gone, but in its place was something new, a chance to rebuild on my terms, without lies, without betrayal, and without her. The past was behind me, and the future was mine to create.